How's it going, everybody? My name is Ben. I'm going to be presenting today on Martha Nussbaum's article titled The Discernment of Perception, an Aristotelian Conception of Private and Public Rationality. This article is a chapter in part of a longer book of hers, and I thought it was pretty good. Before I jump in, she looks like she's in incredible shape for a 70-plus-year-old woman. Like, unbelievable. Anyway, how I'm going to go about this presentation, I'm first just going to introduce the question that Martha is addressing. Then I'm going to talk about the side that she takes and the argument that she makes in three different parts for the side that she's taking on this specific question. Then we're going to talk about Aristotelian rationality in literature, some applications for this style of rationality in public policy, and then some questions that I have about Nussbaum's chapter. So first up, what is she talking about? Basically, this article is about decision-making. She's contrasting the views of Plato and Aristotle and asking, should we make decisions how Aristotle says we should, or should we decide on the model advanced by Plato? So to introduce Plato's position, Nussbaum and Aristotle are basically going to classify this position under a term called scientific rationality. And it basically asks the question of whether correct judgment can be scientifically discovered under a system of general rules and observations. So could we just experiment, observe, and record a general system for guiding our actions? And scientific rationality, according to Nussbaum and Aristotle, is just like a grouping together of a bunch of different positions, but they logically cohere according to Nussbaum in Plato's work. There's an emphasis on general/universal rules, standard measurements of good in all actions, and irrationality of the passions and emotions. So in contrast, we have Aristotle's position, who's basically going to say that correct judgment lies in the perception of the situation. Practical decision-making, according to Aristotle, cannot follow a model of scientific rationality, and it would actually be made worse if we tried to do this. Correct judgment lies in attention to the complex, concrete particulars of one's situation. And general principles may be useful in some cases, however, they're not prior to perception or the specific details. And Nussbaum is going to argue for Aristotle's stance on decision-making. So how is she going to make this argument? Well, it's in three parts. I'm calling it the triple-pronged attack. The first is Aristotle's idea of plural values and non-commensurability. So what he doesn't like is what Nussbaum calls the science of measurement, which coheres in the work of Plato, according to her. And it's basically that we need to find out a single standard of value for correct rational choice. Everything has some value X, and we should just choose the action that would maximize this variable X. There are four claims to commensurability of value in all actions. Those are metricity, singleness, consequentialism, and maximization. And it's basically the idea that there's all of these put together really quickly is that there's a common value in all choice alternatives that can be measured. The choices you make are good insofar as they only produce good results according to this specific measure, and we should maximize the measure of whatever variable that we decide on. And there are different accounts of an end content or variable which we should maximize, and Aristotle is going to reject all of them. So instead, Aristotle wants to claim that choice should be viewed as a selection among goods that are plural and heterogeneous, each having its own distinct value. So there's nothing that we could measure in every single action and compare it to all other actions in order to form a correct decision. He rejects a number of different suggestions for qualitatively homogeneous ends of all activity, Most notably in the reading that Nussbaum discusses is pleasure. And Aristotle is claiming that all possible actions have distinct good. There isn't a single variable common to all of them, which we can just maximize in our decisions. So some things that Aristotle and Nussbaum are going to claim that the science of measurement can easily overlook. Nussbaum gives one specific example of deciding whether you should play music or help a friend. Even if we could find a common measure of value in both of these activities, Aristotle argues we would be neglecting the genuine distinct value of each. These goods, playing music or hanging out with your friend, are non-interchangeable, and a life that lacks one of them would fall short of full goodness, regardless of the quantity good possessed by one in other activities. So if you chose to help out a friend, the utility or whatever you're getting from this activity couldn't like make up for the distinct value of playing music. And Nussbaum asks, would anybody want a friend who was able to deliberate efficiently about friendship because they could get themselves to conceive of it as a function of some other value, which is just basically like, would you want a friend who makes their decisions based on a commensurable variable in all actions? That would be super weird. And also another point that commensurability and homogeneity of value overlooks is the unchosen alternative, which is very important in most decisions. Nussbaum gives a really interesting example in the reading of President Truman dropping bombs on Japan to end World War II. She says that it matters whether Truman chooses to use nuclear weapons with unswerving confidence in his own powers of reason or with reluctance, remorse, and the belief that he is obligated to make whatever reparations can be made. So it matters the option that you don't choose and the emotional effects that that could have on just people and society in general. And we can see Nussbaum starting to address public policy already pretty early in this article. So next part of the triple-pronged attack is the priority of the particular. Aristotle is claiming in this idea that rational choice cannot be captured fully in a general system of rules, and we can't just have this system of rules and then apply them to each new case. He wants to emphasize the concrete particulars or the specific contextual features of every situation as distinct and decisions being made as good in themselves. So this isn't an outright rejection of rules completely. Aristotle is claiming that principles are authoritative and we can use them only insofar as they are correct, but they are correct only insofar as they do not err with regard to the particulars. So they can be used in cases where we need to make a decision quickly. We don't have time to deliberate over the concrete particulars. And yeah, there's just no shortcut for determining the correct answer using a model of rules. He mentions, or Nussbaum mentions, 3 specific reasons why ethics should not strive for the precision of the science of measurement or a general system of rules that science looks to make of the world. That's that the first is that practical decision-making matters lack fixity, values are always changing, and a system of rules can only address what we've seen before. Aristotle says that practical reasoning has an indefinable character, so rules cannot account for the complex requirements that discernment, or the correct discernment in a concrete situation actually has. And ethical matters, this one I think is the most important. Ethical matters contain non-repeatable elements. So there will be many important decisions that you and I have to make in our lives that contain elements that are just completely unique and entirely distinct to our own situation. Nobody else will ever have the relationship that I have with one of my specific friends or my brother or my mom or my dad. And nobody else will have the exact or ever be in the exact specific situation that anybody else has with like important people in their lives, such as their families. And lastly, we have Nussbaum and Aristotle's argument for the rationality of emotions and imagination, which really contrasts with many major philosophical theories of decision-making and right action, and especially more modern contemporary theories that have been advanced by the social sciences, such as economics. And in economics, like emotions are just completely, I mean, not completely, but most of the time irrational to follow and make decisions on. Aristotle is going to actually say that rational deliberation requires the use of emotions and imagination. And in the chapter, Aristotle or Nussbaum refers to Aristotle's term of imagination as fantasia, which utilizes its selective and discriminatory character to link together concrete particulars instead of generalizing from them. And she also says, even where a correct choice is reached in the absence of feeling an emotional response, Aristotle will insist that it is less virtuous and that the choice is less virtuous than choice that is emotional. Excuse me. I'm not entirely sure if I agree with that point. Another interesting point about this particular part of the argument is the idea that intellect alone can be a dangerous master. Nussbaum mentions a specific parable told by Sophocles about a character named Creon, and this man is obsessed with the theoretical task of defining human concerns in terms of a singularly coherent framework, yet he fails to recognize within this singularly coherent framework that he has a distinct special relationship with his own son and doesn't even recognize that he has a son really until his tragic death. And Nussbaum is claiming that all of these three parts of the argument all cohere together in one logically distinct position. That is Aristotle's theory of decision making. We have heterogeneity of value. There isn't one thing that we can just measure in all goods and compare them to each other, or sorry, actions, excuse me, and compare these actions to each other. The priority of the particular, so we can have general rules, but the concrete details of a situation are prior, and intellect alone is not sufficient for correct choice. We need to involve our emotions and passions, and they actually must match the choice that we are making. And Nussbaum is basically just claiming that if you want to defend one of these points, you're inclined to defend all of them. She goes on to say that an Aristotelian agent is a person whom we could trust to describe a complex situation with full concreteness of detail and emotional shading, missing nothing of practical relevance. And she asks, well, what individuals do we think would be really good at this? And the answer is a novelist. So she puts a few pages of a Henry James novel in the middle of her chapter from this book called The Golden Bowl. And I'm going to try to break down the situation of what's happening as quickly as I can here, because this video is probably going to take a super long time. Sorry, this is a long chapter. But basically what's happening in here is there is a woman named Maggie in this novel, and she must decide whether to let her husband, Amerigo, have a visit with her ex-best friend, or still best friend, Charlotte, before Charlotte moves from Europe to the United States with her husband, who is actually Maggie's father. Charlotte is also one of Maggie's former best friends, one of Amerigo's ex-lovers, and actually the reason that she's moving to America with Maggie's father is that Charlotte and Amerigo, who is Maggie's husband, have been having an affair, and Maggie arranges for them to just move to the United States without like telling her father or anything about what's going on. And it's seen as an act of diplomacy by Amerigo. So she must decide in this scene whether to let Amerigo go see Charlotte like one last time before they leave forever. And basically Martha's point here is just that Maggie's decision displays a moral intellect and certain level of maturity that she didn't have in the beginning of the novel, but she does at the end. She weighs the concrete particulars of her situation, but also considers the obligation that she has from general terms, which she references to as father, best friend, uh, and husband. These terms create specific obligations as general rules, and Maggie has to weigh them with the specific details of the actual situation. We also have a section in this chapter about how Aristotelian rationality and decision making can be applied to public life. I thought John Lewis is somebody, if anybody in politics who has ever embodied this conception of rationality, it would be him. So yeah, this section is really focused on judges. She does mention that it can be applied to legislators, but really she admits that Aristotle's form of rationality lends itself a little bit better to non-democratic forms of governing. And she basically brings up the point that if we had judges that didn't reason in an Aristotelian fashion, we would think it would be wrong. And she brings up the example of Robert Bork's rejection from the Supreme Court, in which his hearing, he wanted to solely adhere to general principles and historical precedent, non-contextualized conception. He had a non-contextualized conception of judgment, and that led to his rejection. So lastly, some questions I had about this article. I hope I've made it clear the differences between the two views that Nussbaum is presenting. But I'm still not fully convinced that this picture of correct judgment in the Aristotelian manner does not collapse into subjectivism or more relativism, as Nussbaum claims. She does mention this briefly later in the chapter, but if correct judgment ultimately lies in the perceiver's interpretation of a situation's concrete particulars, it's also up to every single one of us to discern whether another person has discerned well. So ultimately, declaring a certain judgment or decision right or wrong just seems like a circular issue here. Another thing I was thinking was, what if our general system of rules was literally infinite? I'm not even sure that this is possible, but I was thinking of a story by author Jorge Luis Borges called The Library of Babel, in which there's just a collection of infinitely many books, and they have an infinite combination together of every character in every language. So if we combined all characters of every language together infinitely, we would hypothetically have answers within this gibberish to every possible question that you could ever think of. Could we rely on this system of rules if it was possible? Aristotle would say probably not, but if it literally had every single answer, I don't know. One thing that I disagreed with, and I just disagree with in Aristotle's view in general, is your matching of emotions to the correct answer or correct judgment. Could a person who's incapable of emotional decision making ever be a virtuous person, according to Aristotle, such as a psychopath or a sociopath? Lastly, if humanity ever developed an infinitely powerful AI program which could objectively determine every single correct decision for you to make in your life, down to like, should I drink coffee this morning or not? Would you choose to follow its directions if it was guaranteed to like make you live the best life possible? And is this possible? And would you do it? So that's it. Sorry for the super long presentation, but thank you guys if you listen to this.